What made a battle-hardened veteran abandon the only shelter he had left and follow his German shepherd into a mountain storm nobody else took seriously? Snow slammed sideways against the ridge as Wade grabbed the steel hatch with both hands. Behind him, Shadow barked once, then went silent. The wind carried a deep groaning sound through the mountain, and somewhere below, an entire town was beginning to run out of time. Ice burned Wade's face. His fingers were numb inside his gloves, and the dog kept staring into the white void, as if he could see something no human could. Then, Wade noticed what Shadow had found. What do you think Shadow saw? The first sign wasn't the frost. People in Red Hollow would later swear it was. They would point to the thin white layer that appeared on fence rails before dawn, or the ice forming along the edges of horse troughs, weeks too early. But Wade Mercer knew better. The first sign was Shadow. The German shepherd had spent 3 years sleeping on the north side of Wade's cabin, curled beneath the same window overlooking the valley. Rain, snow, summer heat, it never mattered. Then one October morning, Shadow refused to go near that side of the house. Wade noticed it before sunrise. He stood on the porch holding a dented metal coffee mug, while darkness still clung to the pines surrounding his property. The mountains rose black against a sky just beginning to turn gray. "What's got into you?" he asked. Shadow remained near the south wall, ears back, eyes fixed on the distant ridgeline. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. A cold wind slid down from the Beartooth Mountains. Not strong, not yet, but it carried something unfamiliar. Wade smelled it before he understood it. Dry, sharp, wrong. The same way he'd once smelled a sandstorm hours before it hit an outpost in Helmand Province. His grip tightened around the mug. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. He hated that. The flashbacks never announced themselves. Sometimes it was a smell, sometimes a sound, sometimes nothing at all. Just a sudden feeling that the past was standing directly behind him. Shadow finally looked away from the mountains and walked toward him. The dog pressed against Wade's leg. Solid, grounding, real. Wade scratched behind his ears. "Yeah," he muttered. "I feel it too." By mid-morning, he was checking the valley. Old habits. Observation first, conclusions later. His father, Frank Mercer, had taught him that, long before the army ever did. The elk were already moving lower, too low, too early. A small herd crossed near Miller Creek, where they normally wouldn't appear until late November. Wade wrote it down. Elk migration, 3 weeks early. That afternoon he noticed something else. The ravens. Hundreds of them. Moving east, not west. Not following their usual route. He wrote that down too. The notebook never left his pocket. Its leather cover had faded from decades of use. Frank Mercer had filled most of its pages before cancer took him 12 years earlier. Wade had continued where his father stopped. Wind patterns, animal behavior, temperatures, snowfall. Little details most people ignored. The kind that kept you alive. By evening the sky turned the color of old steel. Shadow still hadn't returned to the north side of the cabin. Instead, he began pacing the property, checking the tree line, stopping often to stare toward the mountains. Around midnight, Wade finally fell asleep in his recliner. The television flickered silently across the room. Outside, wind rattled something metallic near the woodshed. Clang, clang, clang. Wade's eyes snapped open. His body reacted before his mind. He was already halfway out of the chair, already searching for cover, already looking for the source. For one disorienting second, he wasn't in Montana. He was back in Afghanistan. Dust, heat, incoming fire. A shipping container exploding somewhere beyond the perimeter. His pulse hammered, then reality returned. The cabin, the television, the cold, Shadow. The dog was standing beside him. Idea, one paw resting lightly against his knee. The nightmare dissolved. Wade exhaled slowly. "It's okay," he whispered. Shadow remained there until the shaking stopped. Neither of them went back to sleep. Just before dawn, Wade stepped outside again. The temperature had dropped hard during the night. Thin frost covered the grass. The valley below sat silent beneath a pale blue haze. Then, he saw Shadow digging, not playing, not chasing scents, digging. The dog worked furiously beside one of the first snow patches that had gathered near the tree line. Dirt flew behind him. Wade walked closer. "Shadow." The dog didn't stop. His claws tore through frozen soil. Again, again. Again. Then suddenly he froze. Every muscle locked. His head lifted. His gaze turned toward the mountains. A low growl rolled deep inside his chest. Not loud. Not aggressive. Warning. Wade followed his stare. The bear-tooth stood motionless beneath the rising sun. Beautiful. Silent. Ancient. And for the first time in years, Wade felt the unmistakable sensation that something was coming. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Soon. Very soon. Shadow never took his eyes off the mountains. Neither did Wade. And somewhere beyond those distant peaks, winter had already begun moving toward Red Hollow. The next morning, he drove into town. His old Ford pickup rattled over the frost-hardened road as pale sunlight spilled across the valley. Red Hollow looked exactly the way it always did in October. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children waited for the school bus. Log trucks rolled through Main Street. Nothing looked wrong. That was the problem. Danger never looked dangerous when it was still far away. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat. His ears twitched constantly. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the mountains visible beyond town. Wade noticed. The dog hadn't relaxed once in nearly 3 days. Not once. He parked outside Maddox Supply. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The familiar smell of lumber, motor oil, and coffee filled the room. Kurt Maddox stood behind the counter counting inventory sheets. He glanced up. Wade. Morning. Kurt nodded. Need something? Wade looked around the store. Propane tanks, generator fuel, salt, emergency lanterns. Everything people would need if he was right. Stock up while you can, Wade said. Kurt paused. What for? Winter. Kurt laughed. Winter comes every year. Not like this. The smile faded slightly. What are you talking about? Wade explained. The elk, the ravens, the temperature drops, the wind, the frost. Everything. Kurt listened for about 30 seconds before shaking his head. You sound like your father. Wade didn't answer. Frank used to do this every fall. My father was usually right. Your father wasn't predicting a blizzard in October. Wade looked through the front window. Clouds were already building above the western ridges, higher than they should have been. Just stock up. Kurt folded his arms. I sell supplies, Wade. Then sell them. Not fear. The conversation ended there. By noon, Wade found himself standing inside the Red Hollow Community Hall. Nearly 40 people had gathered. Farmers, shop owners, teachers, retirees. Pastor Eli Bennett sat near the front. Mayor Darren Holt stood beside the stage. The meeting had originally been about road maintenance before winter. Wade changed that. He stepped forward when Darren asked if anyone had concerns. I do. Several people turned. Darren sighed almost immediately. Wade noticed. I think we're going to get hit early. I think we're going to get hit early. I think we're going to get hit early. A few heads nodded politely. He continued. Not just early. He looked around the room. Hard. Silence. Store fuel. Check roofs. Stack firewood. Prepare generators. The room remained quiet. For a moment he thought maybe they were listening. Then somebody chuckled. Another person laughed. The spell broke. Darren rubbed his forehead. How early are we talking? Days. That made the room laugh harder. Pastor Bennett leaned forward. What makes you believe that? Wade glanced toward the windows. The signs. The signs? The animals. The laughter returned. Not cruel. Not yet. Dismissive. Which somehow felt worse. Wade felt Shadow move beside his leg. The dog had come with him. Now he stood rigid, watching everyone. Mayor Holt shook his head. Wade, we've all seen early frost. This isn't frost. It's October. It won't stay October. Someone in the back whispered something. More laughter followed. Pastor Bennett finally stood. He wasn't a bad man. Wade knew that. But sometimes good men preferred comfortable lies. The pastor folded his hands. Maybe you're seeing the world through old battles. The room grew quiet again. Wade understood exactly what he meant. Afghanistan, PTSD, the things nobody said directly, the things everybody knew. I'm seeing what I see. Of course. The pastor smiled gently, the way people smile when they think they're protecting someone from embarrassment. Then a generator outside sputtered. Pop. Crack. For most people, it was nothing. For Wade, it was different. His body moved before his mind. He turned sharply, eyes searching, measuring exits, cover, distance, threat. Every instinct activated at once. The room saw it. Every person. The silence that followed felt heavier than the laughter. Wade froze. A second later, he realized where he was. Community Hall, Montana. Not Helmand. Not an attack. Not incoming fire. Just a faulty generator. Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him, pulling him back. Nobody laughed this time, which somehow felt even worse. Mayor Holt cleared his throat. I think we're done here. The meeting moved on. Road repairs, budget discussions, snowplows. Nobody mentioned Wade's warning again. Outside, he stood beside his truck, staring at the mountains. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Noah Parker appeared. The 12-year-old boy carried a backpack nearly as large as he was. He hesitated. Mr. Mercer? Wade turned. Noah looked nervous. My grandpa says animals know things before people do. Wade smiled faintly. Your grandpa's smart. The boy glanced toward Shadow. The dog watched him calmly. You really think a storm is coming? Wade looked west. Clouds were gathering again. Dark ones, high and fast. I do. Noah nodded slowly. Then he left. The small moment stayed with Wade all afternoon, because it was the first time anyone had asked, instead of laughed. That night, the temperature collapsed. By sunset, it was 38 degrees. By midnight, it was 18. Water pipes froze across parts of town. Thin sheets of ice appeared along Miller Creek. Wind hammered the valley from the west. At 3 a.m, Wade sat awake beside the cabin window. Shadow stood beside him. Neither slept, neither relaxed. Outside, moonlight glimmered across frozen grass. The cold had arrived far too fast, far too hard. And deep in the darkness beyond Red Hollow, the mountains answered with a low, distant groan. The sound rolled through the valley like something enormous shifting in its sleep. Shadow's ears snapped forward. The dog stared into the darkness. Then he growled, very softly, very low. And this time, Wade felt it too. By morning, Red Hollow had a shine to it. Not snow, ice, the kind that glazed porch steps, truck mirrors, fence wire, and the narrow shoulder of the road until everything looked polished and wrong. Wade drove carefully into town with Shadow beside him, the truck heater coughing weak air through the vents. The radio said nothing useful, just a cheerful voice from Billings talking about an unexpected cold snap and advising folks to bring their pets indoors. Wade turned it off. Shadow kept watching the tree line. The Veterans Housing Center sat on the east side of Red Hollow, near the old timber mill that had been shut down since 2009. It was a long, low building with faded blue siding and a flagpole out front. Wade had lived there for almost 4 years, after selling the last piece of land his wife had loved before she passed. It wasn't home, but it had walls, heat, a bed, a place Shadow could sleep. That morning, 2 men were waiting near the front office when Wade walked in. Martha Keene, the center director, stood behind her desk with her hands folded too tightly. Beside her was George Wilkes from the county board, wearing a wool coat and the expression of a man trying to look sorry without getting involved. Wade stopped in the doorway. Shadow stopped with him. What's this? Wade asked. Martha looked at the floor first. That told him enough. Wade, she said, we've had complaints. He didn't move. About what? The meeting yesterday. The store. The calls you made to the road office. Different. I warned people. George cleared his throat. Some folks say you scared them. Wade stared at him. Good. Martha flinched slightly. Wade regretted the sharpness the moment it left his mouth, but he didn't take it back. Outside, a truck passed slowly over the icy road, tires crackling across frozen gravel. George shifted his weight. This facility can't be connected to public panic. Panic doesn't freeze pipes, Wade said. Weather does. Martha reached for a manila envelope on the desk. We think it would be best if you stayed somewhere else for a while. The room went very still. Shadow's ears lifted. Wade looked at the envelope but did not take it. For a while, he repeated. Martha's face tightened. Until things calmed down. He almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he knew that sentence. He had heard versions of it after Helmand. After the hospital, after the night he woke up in his own kitchen with a pistol in his hand and no memory of crossing the room. Until things calmed down, as if calm was a place a man could simply return to. Wade reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed the paper. No tremor. Not yet. You want me out before dark? Martha swallowed. We can give you until morning. No. He tucked the envelope under one arm. I know how to move before daylight. Nobody answered that. In his small room at the end of the hall, Wade packed slowly. Not much. 2 shirts, wool socks, a field jacket, waterproof matches, a dented canteen, a first aid kit with more miles on it than some men. Shadow sat by the door, watching the hallway. Wade pulled his father's notebook from the drawer beside the bed. The leather cover felt colder than it should have. He opened it, then froze. One page was missing, cleanly torn, not old, fresh. A pale strip of paper still clung to the binding. Wade stared at it for several seconds. Then he turned the notebook sideways, checking the spine, the pockets, the folded notes Frank had tucked between weather records. Something had been taken. Shadow stood. A low sound came from his chest. Wade looked toward the window. Outside, footprints marked the thin crust of ice below the sill. Too large for Martha, too deep for a child. Someone had come close enough to look in. Maybe more than look. Wade crossed the room and touched the window latch. Unlocked. He always locked it. Always. His mouth went dry. For the first time since the warning, the shape of the danger changed. It wasn't only the storm. Someone else knew there was something in Frank Mercer's notebook worth stealing. He packed faster after that. No wasted motion. Gear left side. Food right side. Knife where his hand could find it in the dark. Flashlight checked twice. Shadow never left the door. Down the hall, someone laughed at a television program. A canned laugh track. Bright. Fake. Out of place. Wade slung the pack over one shoulder and took one last look at the room. The narrow bed. The metal chair. The framed certificate from the VA counselor he never hung straight. The window with the fresh marks beneath it. He reached down and rested his hand on Shadow's head. You ready? The dog looked up once, then turned toward the exit. They left after midnight. Not because they had to, because Wade knew how a place felt once it had decided you no longer belonged. The hallway lights hummed overhead. Martha's office was dark. Outside, the cold struck hard enough to make his eyes water. The town lay quiet beneath a silver crust of ice. No one watched from the windows. No one called his name. Shadow moved ahead of him toward the truck, paws careful on the frozen ground. Wade opened the passenger door. The dog jumped in. Before Wade climbed behind the wheel, he looked west. The Beartooth Mountains were hidden behind a wall of cloud now. Low, heavy, moving. He placed Frank's damaged notebook on the seat between them. The missing page seemed louder than the wind. Then somewhere behind the center, metal clanged once against a pole. Wade's shoulders tightened. Shadow's head snapped toward the sound. Nothing moved, not visibly. But in the darkness beyond the building, a shape withdrew between 2 parked trucks. Too quick to identify, too deliberate to ignore. Wade started the engine. The old Ford shuddered awake. He did not turn on the headlights until he was already rolling. By the time Red Hollow disappeared behind him, dawn was still hours away. And for the first time in years, Wade Mercer was heading into the mountains, with no roof behind him, no town beside him, and no idea who had started looking for the same thing his father had tried to hide. The road climbed west through dark timber. Pines crowded both sides of the narrow pavement, their branches rattling in the wind. Every few miles, Wade glanced into the rearview mirror. Old habits. Years after Afghanistan, he still checked his 6, still noticed headlights, still counted vehicles, still remembered routes. Shadow remained unusually alert. The dog rarely slept while the truck was moving. Tonight he didn't even try. Around 3 in the morning, snow began falling. Not heavily. Just enough to turn the windshield into a blur of drifting white. Wade drove another 20 miles before turning onto an abandoned Forest Service road. The truck's tires crunched across frozen gravel. Eventually, the road narrowed so much that fallen branches scraped both sides of the vehicle. He stopped. The engine clicked quietly as it cooled. Silence followed. Deep mountain silence. The kind that swallowed every human sound. Wade grabbed his flashlight, his pack, Frank's notebook. Then he and Shadow stepped into the cold. The temperature hit like a fist. Their breath immediately turned white. Above them, clouds covered the stars. The mountains had disappeared. Only darkness remained. They walked for nearly an hour before finding shelter beneath a rocky overhang overlooking a narrow valley. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind. For tonight, that was enough. Wade gathered dead pine branches, built a small fire, not large enough to advertise his location, just enough to keep the cold away. Shadow settled nearby. Yet even lying down, the dog kept lifting his head toward the darkness. Listening, watching, waiting. Wade opened Frank's notebook. The missing page still bothered him. More than bothered him. It felt deliberate, targeted. He turned the pages slowly. Weather records, wind directions, snow depths, migration notes. Most entries were decades old. Frank's handwriting remained steady throughout, methodical, precise. Then something caught Wade's attention. The inside cover looked thicker than it should. He frowned, ran his thumb along the leather seam. There, a slight ridge, almost invisible. He held the notebook closer to the firelight. The old leather had separated slightly from the cardboard beneath. Wade reached into his pocket, pulled out a pocket knife, carefully slipped the blade under the edge. The cover lifted. A hidden compartment. His pulse quickened. Inside lay a folded piece of yellowed paper. Nothing else, just one sheet, protected for decades. Wade unfolded it carefully. A map, hand-drawn, old. The paper crackled in his hands. A narrow route wound through the western mountains, across ridges, through valleys, toward a location marked only by a circle. Beside it were 4 words, Raven Ridge. Below the map, Frank had written a single sentence. If winter ever comes too early, go where the mountain stays warm. Wade stared at the words. The fire crackled softly beside him. Shadow lifted his head. For a long moment, neither moved. The phrase felt familiar. Not because Wade had heard it before, because it sounded like something Frank would say when he didn't want to explain everything. A clue, not an answer, the way he'd always taught. The wind shifted suddenly. A sharp gust swept beneath the overhang. The fire flickered. Somewhere far out in the darkness came a loud crack. Wade's body reacted instantly. He rolled sideways. Knife already in hand, heart hammering, scanning, searching. The movement happened before thought, before reason, before awareness. For half a second, he wasn't in Montana. He was back inside a mud-walled compound outside Lashkar Gah, hearing incoming fire, waiting for contact, waiting for someone not to come home. The memory hit hard, then vanished. The darkness remained, silent, empty. Only after several seconds did Wade realize the sound had been a tree, a heavy pine splitting under ice. Nothing more. His breathing slowly eased. Shadow crossed the short distance between them. The dog leaned against his shoulder. Solid, warm, real. Wade rested a hand on the thick fur behind his neck. Still here, partner. The dog's tail thumped once against the ground. Morning arrived, gray and cold. The mountains looked different now, closer, sharper. The storm clouds hung low across the ridges. Snow drifted through the timber in thin white sheets. After a quick breakfast, Wade studied the map again. The route pointed northwest, toward country few people entered anymore. Old logging roads, steep ravines, forgotten trails. Exactly the kind of place someone could hide something, or protect it. They walked all day. By afternoon, the terrain grew rougher. Rock outcroppings replaced forest. The trail narrowed. Several times, Wade stopped to compare landmarks against the map. Everything matched. Too well. Frank had known this area intimately. As evening approached, Shadow suddenly froze. Every muscle tightened. His nose lowered to the snow. The dog began moving slowly, tracking. Wade immediately noticed. What is it? Shadow followed something across the trail. A line of impressions barely visible beneath fresh snowfall. Human footprints. Recent. Very recent. Wade crouched beside them. The edges remained sharp. No drifting. No ice. Maybe 12 hours old. Maybe less. Someone had come through here after the storm began, following the same route, following Frank's map. A cold feeling settled into Wade's stomach. The missing notebook page. The unlocked window. The shadow behind the Veterans Center. Now this. The pieces were beginning to connect, but not in a way he liked. Shadow continued studying the tracks, then slowly turned his head toward the distant ridge ahead. The dog stared, unmoving, alert. Wade followed his gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then, far away, near the crest of Raven Ridge, a brief flash, sunlight reflecting off metal, gone almost immediately, but long enough. Someone was up there, watching, and whoever it was had reached the ridge first. Wade lowered himself behind a cluster of wind-bent pines and studied the slope through a pair of compact binoculars he carried in his pack. Nothing. The flash was gone. Only rock, snow, and the endless gray sky hanging low above Raven Ridge. Shadow remained perfectly still beside him. The German shepherd's ears pointed forward. Every muscle looked coiled. Waiting. Years ago, Wade had learned something in Afghanistan. The first thing you saw was rarely the thing you needed to worry about. It was the thing you didn't see. The second observer. The hidden route. The quiet movement. The empty window. The missing page. He lowered the binoculars. "We keep moving." Shadow immediately stood. Neither of them liked it. But daylight was fading, and whatever waited on that ridge, Wade needed answers before the storm swallowed the mountain. They climbed for another 2 hours. The terrain grew steeper with every step. Loose shale shifted beneath Wade's boots. Wind screamed through narrow cuts in the rock. Several times he stopped to compare the landscape against Frank's map. The landmarks matched perfectly. A split granite wall, a frozen creek, a dead stand of white pines killed by lightning decades ago. Frank had walked this route many times. The realization stayed with Wade. His father had never been a man who wasted effort. If he built a hidden compartment inside a notebook and protected a map for decades, then whatever waited at Raven Ridge mattered. A lot. By late afternoon, snow began falling harder. Visibility dropped. The world narrowed to shades of white and gray. Then Shadow suddenly stopped. The dog planted himself directly in front of Wade, refusing to move. "What is it?" Shadow glanced uphill, then back at Wade, then uphill again. The same look he used when trying to block a dangerous trail. Wade frowned. A second later he heard it. A low crack, almost hidden beneath the wind. Then another. The sound came from above. He followed it with his eyes. A shelf of snow near the ridge face shifted. Only slightly. But enough. Avalanche. Not a large one. Not yet. Wade's stomach tightened. The route they were about to take ran directly beneath it. Shadow had sensed it first. Again. Without hesitation, Wade changed course. They moved. 50 yards east. Then 100. The slope there looked less direct, less efficient, but safer. 5 minutes later, the mountains answered. The snow shelf collapsed. A white river exploded down the original route. Ice, rock, snow. Everything thundered through the narrow cut where Wade would have been standing. The sound rolled across the ridge for nearly a minute, then silence returned. Wade stared. Shadow simply looked at him, as if asking why humans always needed proof. A slow smile touched Wade's face. "You just saved me again." The dog's tail moved once, nothing more. For Shadow, it wasn't heroics. It was Tuesday. Dusk arrived shortly afterward. The storm intensified. Snow now swept sideways across the ridge. Wade knew they needed shelter before darkness. Fast. The map indicated they were close. Very close. Yet nothing appeared. No cabin. No bunker. No structure. Only stone and snow. Then Shadow began digging. At first, Wade thought the dog had found an animal scent, but Shadow ignored every command. He attacked a drift piled against a rock wall. Snow flew behind him. Again. 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 The dog worked with an urgency Wade had never seen before. Wade walked over. "What did you find?" Shadow didn't stop. Several minutes passed. Then the shovel in Wade's pack struck something solid beneath the snow. Metal. Both froze. Wade knelt immediately. Together they cleared more snow. A dark shape emerged. Flat. Angular. Man-made. His pulse quickened. The steel surface continued downward. Then a handle appeared. Then hinges. A door. A heavy steel door, buried beneath decades of snow, dirt, and mountain weather. For several seconds, Wade simply stared. The storm howled around them. Yet the door remained, waiting, hidden, exactly where Frank's map had led. Wade brushed away ice near the handle. A faded government marking remained barely visible. U.S. Civil Defense. His breath caught. Cold War era. 1960s. Maybe older. His father had never worked for the military after leaving service. At least that was what Wade had always believed. Now he wasn't so sure. The lock remained intact. Rust covered most of it. Yet when Wade examined it more closely, something looked familiar. The key shape, the size, the design. His hand moved automatically toward his pack. Inside Frank's notebook compartment had been something else, a small brass key. Wade had barely thought about it, until now. His fingers closed around it. The metal felt cold as ice. Slowly, he inserted it into the lock. Nothing happened. For one terrible moment, he thought it wouldn't fit. Then the mechanism shifted. A deep metallic click echoed beneath the mountain. Wade looked at Shadow. Shadow looked back. Neither moved. Finally, Wade gripped the handle, pulled. At first the door resisted, then something gave. The seal broke. A gust of dry air escaped from below. Not warm, but not frozen either. Different. Ancient. Still. The door opened wider. Darkness waited beneath. A steel ladder descended into the mountain. No light. No sound. No sign of who might have reached the ridge before them. Only darkness. Wade switched on his flashlight. The beam cut downward. Concrete walls. A narrow corridor. Dust untouched for years. Maybe decades. He swallowed. Frank. The word disappeared into the dark. Shadow stepped forward first. The dog lowered his head, sniffed the air. Then, without hesitation, began climbing down. That surprised Wade more than the bunker itself. Shadow never entered confined spaces willingly, unless he felt safe. That was enough. Wade followed. The steel ladder groaned softly beneath his weight. Step by step, they descended. 10 feet, 15, 20. Then Wade's boots touched concrete. The flashlight swept across the room. What it revealed stole his breath. Shelving, crates, water tanks, tools, a generator, a cast-iron stove, everything preserved beneath the mountain. And on the far wall hung a faded photograph. 3 men standing outside the very bunker they now occupied. One of them was unmistakable. Frank Mercer, young, strong, smiling, for the first time in years. And beneath the photograph, someone had written 3 words. 4. The hard winter. Wade stared at them, then at the bunker, then at Shadow. Outside, the storm battered Raven Ridge. But deep inside the mountain, hope had just opened a steel door. For the first time in days, Wade Mercer slept without the wind touching his face. Not comfortably, not deeply, but safely. That alone felt strange. The bunker was larger than it had appeared from outside. Several rooms branched from the main corridor, storage spaces, mechanical rooms, sleeping quarters. Most sat untouched beneath decades of dust. The flashlight beam revealed shelves lined with rusted tools, old military blankets, water drums, and wooden crates marked with dates from the early 1960s. Some supplies had long since become useless. Others remained surprisingly intact. Frank Mercer had not chosen this place by accident. That much was becoming obvious. Morning arrived without sunlight. The storm continued above them. The mountain absorbed most of the noise, yet Wade could still hear distant gusts rolling across the ridge like waves breaking against stone. Shadow spent nearly an hour exploring every room. Methodical, thorough, the same way military working dogs cleared unfamiliar structures. The old instincts never disappeared. Neither did Wade's. By noon, he had already begun evaluating the bunker. Not as a shelter, as a system, a habit left over from his years in the Army Corps of Engineers. Every structure had strengths. Every structure had weaknesses. The trick was finding them before nature did. The first problem appeared near the ventilation shafts. Cold air leaked through several damaged seals. The second appeared near the water storage area. A pipe had frozen and cracked long ago. The third problem sat in the center of the main room. The cast-iron stove. Its chimney system no longer drafted correctly. Smoke stains on the ceiling told the story. Someone had tried using it years earlier. It had failed. Wade rolled up his sleeves. Work always helped. Work gave the mind somewhere to go. Somewhere other than old memories. Hours passed. He cleaned vents, inspected pipes, cleared debris, adjusted airflow. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the bunker slowly began waking up. Shadow remained nearby throughout the day, sometimes watching, sometimes sleeping, always paying attention. Toward evening, Wade finally decided to test the stove. He gathered dry wood from an old storage pile, built a small fire, then waited. At first, everything looked promising. The flames caught quickly. Heat spread through the room. Smoke climbed toward the chimney. Then the draft reversed. Without warning, gray smoke rolled back into the bunker. The room filled rapidly. Wade cursed. grabbed a shovel, opened additional vents. Nothing worked. The smoke thickened. His eyes burned. The smell instantly pulled something loose inside his mind. Burning fuel. Hot metal. Confined space. For one terrible second, he was back inside a damaged vehicle outside Kandahar. Trapped. Smoke everywhere. Radio traffic screaming. Someone calling for help. His chest tightened. The bunker vanished. The mountain vanished. Only the memory remained. Then Shadow barked. Once. Sharp. Close. Wade blinked. Reality returned. The dog stood near the doorway, waiting, watching him. The fire, the bunker, the mountain, all real again. Wade forced himself to breathe. Slow. Controlled. In. Out. The way therapists had taught him years ago. The way Shadow had helped him relearn. Together they extinguished the fire. The room gradually cleared. Night settled outside. The storm intensified. Snow hammered the ridge. Temperatures dropped even lower. Wade spread blankets near one side of the bunker and prepared to sleep. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Before lying down, he noticed something curious. Shadow refused to settle beside the stove, the warmest place in the bunker. Instead, the dog chose a spot farther away, near a basalt wall along the eastern side. Wade frowned. Too cold over there. Shadow ignored him, curled up, closed his eyes, stayed. The behavior bothered Wade enough that he moved his own bedding closer to inspect the area. Nothing seemed unusual. Just stone, dry ground, still air. Eventually fatigue won. He returned to the warmer side of the room and fell asleep. Sometime after midnight, he felt pressure against his shoulder. Shadow, the dog, stood beside him, insistent, pushing, again and again. Wade opened one eye. What? Shadow grabbed the edge of the blanket with his teeth. Pulled. Not hard. Just enough. Wade sat up, confused. The dog immediately moved toward the basalt wall, then looked back, waiting. The behavior felt deliberate, almost urgent. Years of working together had taught Wade one thing. When Shadow acted like that, there was usually a reason. He gathered his blanket, moved across the room, settled near the dog's chosen location. Shadow immediately relaxed, laid down, rested his head on his paws, satisfied. 10 minutes later, a cracking sound echoed overhead. Wade's eyes opened. The ceiling groaned. A section of stone broke loose from above. The rock crashed directly onto the spot where he had been sleeping moments earlier. Dust exploded across the room. Silence followed. Wade stared. The chunk weighed nearly 80 pounds, maybe more. Had he remained there, the impact could have killed him. Or worse. Beside him, Shadow barely lifted his head, as if the outcome had been obvious all along. Wade sat quietly for a long moment, listening to his own breathing, listening to the wind above. Finally, he reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. You knew. Shadow's tail tapped once against the floor. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic, just certainty. The same certainty he'd shown beside avalanches, storms, flashbacks, danger. For the second time in less than a week, the dog had saved his life. Wade leaned back against the wall. The basalt felt warmer than the rest of the bunker. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. He frowned, pressed his hand against the stone. The temperature difference was real, not large, but noticeable. Interesting, very interesting. Frank Mercer had hidden more than a shelter beneath Raven Ridge. The old man had found something special, something the mountain itself was protecting. As the storm raged overhead, Wade looked around the bunker with new eyes, not as a refuge, not as a hiding place, as a future. And for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, he began to believe they might actually survive the winter. If the mountain allowed it, and if Shadow kept choosing the right spot. 3 days later, winter arrived. Not the winter Red Hollow expected. 3 days later, not the slow, familiar season that usually crept into Montana one cold morning at a time. This winter came like an invasion. Wade woke before dawn, to a sound he hadn't heard in years. The mountain shaking. Not literally, but close enough. Wind slammed against Raven Ridge with such force that the bunker walls vibrated faintly beneath his fingertips. Snow hissed across the steel entrance above them. The storm had finally reached full strength. Wade climbed the ladder after sunrise. The door fought him the entire way. When he finally pushed it open, the world had vanished. White. Nothing but white. The ridge, where he had first discovered the bunker, was gone. The trees were gone. The trail was gone. The mountains themselves seemed to have disappeared beneath the storm. Snow drifted higher than his waist. The wind stole his breath immediately. Wade shut the door again and descended back into the shelter. He didn't need another look. The valley was cut off, exactly as he had feared. For the next several days, survival became routine. Repair, maintain, adapt. The bunker slowly transformed from a forgotten relic into a living shelter. Wade repaired one of the water systems. A small underground spring still flowed beneath part of the structure. The water wasn't warm, but it wasn't frozen either. That alone felt miraculous. He improved the stove draft, patched damaged insulation, cleared blocked air shafts. Every day brought another problem. Every problem demanded another solution, and somehow that felt familiar. War had taught him something strange. People survived by solving the next problem, not the next year. Not the next month, the next problem, one at a time. Shadow remained his constant companion. The dog seemed happier underground than Wade expected, more relaxed, more confident. Several times, Wade noticed something odd. Whenever moisture collected along the walls, Shadow moved first. Whenever a cold draft appeared, Shadow found it before Wade did. The German Shepherd treated the bunker like a living thing, listening to it, learning it. One evening, Wade followed the dog into a storage corridor he had barely explored. Shadow stopped beside a concrete wall, sat down, waited. "What?" The dog looked at him, then at the wall, then back again. Wade sighed. "You're turning into your own treasure map." Still, he grabbed a flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow maintenance hatch hidden behind rusted shelving. It took him nearly 20 minutes to force it open. Inside lay an access tunnel leading toward the eastern side of the bunker. The air felt different there, warmer, only slightly, but noticeable. Wade crouched and touched the stone. Again, he felt that faint heat beneath the mountain, the same warmth he'd noticed days earlier. Frank had known about this. Of course he had. The old man never missed details. That night, Wade found another surprise. A metal storage box hidden inside a utility cabinet. Inside were several documents protected in waterproof sleeves. Most had been ruined by age. One remained readable. A roster, construction records, Project Raven Ridge. Frank Mercer's name appeared near the top. So did another. Cole Brennan. The name meant nothing to Wade. Not yet. But he remembered it. Outside, the storm continued growing stronger. Inside Red Hollow, things were beginning to fall apart. Wade didn't know the details yet, but the signs were obvious. The emergency radio crackled more frequently every day. Reports of power outages, road closures, frozen lines, stranded vehicles. The storm was spreading across the region. One afternoon, he heard something else, a familiar voice. Mayor Darren Holt. The transmission lasted less than a minute. State, crews, unable to reach. Static, roads completely blocked. More static. Dot. Remain indoors. Then silence. Wade stared at the radio. Shadow lifted his head. Neither moved. The people who had laughed were now fighting the same winter he had tried to warn them about. A strange sadness settled over him. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just sadness. He had wanted them prepared, not punished. That evening he opened Frank's notebook again. For hours he compared old weather entries against current conditions. The numbers matched disturbingly well. One entry stopped him cold. Winter event November, 1962. Roads closed. 41 days. Supply failures expected. Community shelter necessary. The date sat only inches from another note. Raven Ridge capacity. 40-plus persons after modifications. Wade read the line twice. Then a third time. 40 people. Not one, not two. 40. The realization settled slowly. Frank had never intended this place for himself. The bunker had always been meant for a community. For families. For emergencies. For exactly this kind of winter. Wade leaned back in his chair. The stove crackled softly nearby. Shadow slept beside the warm basalt wall. Outside, snow hammered the mountain. Inside, an uncomfortable thought took shape. If the storm continued, if supplies failed, if Red Hollow truly became trapped, people would come. The idea should have frightened him. Instead, it felt inevitable. The old bunker was not a hiding place. It was a lifeboat. A few days later, while clearing snow near the entrance, Wade discovered something sticking from beneath the steel door. A folded piece of paper. Fresh. Impossible. He immediately scanned the ridge. Nothing. No movement. No tracks. The wind had erased everything. Shadow searched the area. Found nothing. Wade unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting belonged to a child. Mr. Mercer. They still don't believe everything, but I do. Grandpa says the roads are gone. Mom says the grocery shelves are getting empty. I hope you and Shadow are okay. Noah. Parker. Wade stared at the letter for a long time. The paper trembled slightly in the wind. Somehow the boy had found a way to leave it. Somehow he had climbed part of the mountain during the storm. At the bottom sat one final sentence, the one that stayed with Wade long after he returned underground. I told them, you weren't lying. Wade folded the note carefully, placed it inside Frank's notebook. Then he looked down at Shadow. The dog was standing rigid near the entrance, not reading the letter, not watching Wade, watching the mountain, every muscle tense, every instinct alert. The same posture he had shown before the avalanche, before the storm, before every danger. Slowly, Shadow began to growl, low, controlled, focused. Wade followed the dog's gaze toward the white emptiness beyond Raven Ridge. At first he saw nothing. Then a dark shape moved briefly between the drifting snow, gone, then visible again. A person, far away, watching the bunker. And this time, they weren't hiding. The figure stood motionless on a distant slope, while snow drifted sideways between them. Too far away to identify, too far away to understand, but close enough to be real. Wade narrowed his eyes. The person remained there for several seconds, then disappeared behind a curtain of blowing snow. Gone, just like that. Shadow continued staring long after the figure vanished. The low growl never left his throat. Wade rested a hand on the dog's neck. Let's not assume the worst. The words sounded reasonable. He didn't believe them. That night he barely slept. Not because of the storm, because of the watcher. The missing notebook page. The footprints near Raven Ridge. The shadow behind the veteran's center. Too many pieces were beginning to fit together. Around midnight, he woke to a sound above the wind. A faint, metallic knock. Then another. 3 slow impacts. Not random. Intentional. Wade sat upright immediately. Shadow was already standing. The dog moved toward the ladder. Alert. Silent. Years ago, Wade had learned something valuable during deployments overseas. Silence usually meant uncertainty. Barking meant confidence. Shadow wasn't barking. That worried him more. Wade grabbed a flashlight and climbed halfway up the ladder. The knocking came again. Slow, measured, a human rhythm. Not the storm, not falling branches. Someone was outside. He opened the hatch only a few inches. Freezing air rushed downward. Snow swirled through the gap. At first, he saw nothing. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. Don't shoot. Old. Male. Exhausted. Wade opened the door farther. A man stood outside, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Snow covered his shoulders. Ice hung from his beard. A rifle rested across his back. The stranger raised both hands. Slowly. Carefully. No sudden movements. The way experienced outdoorsmen approached uncertain situations. Shadow stepped forward beside Wade. The dog's nose worked constantly. Testing. Evaluating. The old man glanced at him, then nodded. Good dog. Shadow did not move. The stranger's eyes shifted to Wade. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then the old man looked past him into the bunker. Frank Mercer built it better than I remembered. Every muscle in Wade's body tightened. What did you say? The old man smiled faintly. Frank always overbuilt everything. Snow whipped around them. The storm howled across Raven Ridge. Yet suddenly Wade heard almost none of it. Only one question mattered. Who are you? The stranger adjusted his gloves. Cole Brennan. The name hit immediately. Wade had seen it inside the construction records. Project Raven Ridge. Frank Mercer. Cole Brennan. The second name on the list. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Shadow finally approached. The German shepherd sniffed the man's boots, his coat, his gloves. Carefully, methodically. When the dog stepped back without growling, Wade made his decision. Get inside. Cole climbed down into the bunker slowly. Age showed in every movement. The moment the hatch closed, the mountain swallowed the storm once again. Warmth from the stove wrapped around them. Cole removed his gloves. His hands shook slightly from the cold. Not fear, cold. Wade poured coffee from an old kettle. The old man accepted it gratefully. For several minutes they sat in silence, watching steam rise from the cups. Finally, Cole looked around the bunker. His eyes lingered on the photograph hanging on the wall, the one with Frank. A faint smile appeared. He never could stand shortcuts. You knew my father well? Cole nodded. 40 years. The answer came without hesitation. He saved my life twice. Wade listened. The old man leaned back in his chair. The first time was during a forest fire. A pause. The second was during the winter of '62. His gaze drifted toward the ceiling, toward the mountain above. The storm that led to this place. Wade felt his pulse quicken. What exactly is Raven Ridge? Cole looked at him for a long moment, then toward Shadow. The dog had settled beside the stove but remained awake, watching, listening, as if he understood every word. Finally, Cole spoke. It wasn't built as a bunker. Wade frowned. What do you mean? It started as an emergency shelter. The old man's voice softened. A place for families, for children, for people trapped when the roads disappeared. Outside, wind slammed against the mountain. Inside, the room felt suddenly smaller. More important, Cole continued. Frank believed Red Hollow would need it someday. And nobody listened? A sad smile crossed the old man's face. No. He looked directly at Wade. Just like nobody listened to you. The words landed harder than Wade expected. Silence followed. Then Cole reached into his coat, pulled out a folded letter. Old. Yellowed. Weathered. He handed it across the table. Wade unfolded it carefully. The handwriting belonged to Frank Mercer, his father. At the bottom sat a date from 30 years earlier. Cole pointed to a single sentence near the center of the page. Wade read it twice, then a third time. When the hard winter comes, don't protect the shelter. Protect the people. Wade stared at the words. The storm raged beyond the mountain. The bunker remained warm. Shadow finally lowered his head onto his paws. But even then, his ears remained alert, as if he sensed something Wade still didn't. And deep down, Wade suspected the dog was right. Because the storm wasn't the only thing climbing toward Raven Ridge anymore. The next week brought the worst weather yet. Snow buried entire sections of the mountain. The steel hatch disappeared twice beneath drifting snow. Wind screamed across the ridge day and night. Even inside the bunker, Wade could feel the pressure of the storm settling over the mountain like a living thing. Yet people were beginning to come. Not many, not yet, but enough. The first was a rancher with frostbitten fingers. The second was an elderly widow whose generator had failed. The third was a father looking for antibiotics for his daughter. Nobody arrived laughing. Nobody arrived mocking. Winter had stripped those things away. Cole Brennan stayed. The old ranger helped where he could. He repaired tools, stacked wood, shared stories about Frank Mercer, and watched Wade transform the bunker into exactly what it had always been intended to become. A shelter, not for one man, for many. One afternoon, while studying supply levels, Wade made a decision. The bunker needed medicine, more blankets, more food. The supplies already stored underground would not be enough if the storms continued, and they would continue. Every instinct told him that. The trip down the mountain was dangerous. Cole knew it. Wade knew it. Shadow definitely knew it. The dog began pacing the moment Wade packed his rucksack. You don't like it? Shadow stopped, looked directly at him. The answer was obvious. No, he did not. But by sunrise, they were moving anyway. The world outside looked frozen in place. Snow covered everything. Fence lines, trails, rock formations, entire sections of forest. Wade navigated mostly by terrain memory and compass headings. Old habits again. Identify landmarks. Check bearings. Never trust what weather wants you to see. Several times, he paused to scan the slopes ahead. Not because he expected trouble, because years in uniform had taught him that trouble often arrived uninvited. The farther they descended, the worse conditions became. Broken branches littered the snow. Entire trees had snapped under the weight of ice. More than once, Wade noticed evidence of small avalanches cutting through nearby ravines. The mountain was under strain. Around midday, they reached an abandoned logging road. For the first time in hours, the route looked manageable. Wade relaxed slightly. Only slightly. That was when Shadow froze. The German shepherd stopped so abruptly that snow sprayed around his paws. His ears snapped forward, body rigid, eyes locked on something above them. Wade followed the dog's gaze. Nothing. Only trees, wind, snow. Then he heard it. A crack. Sharp. Violent. Directly overhead. Instinct took over. Wade started moving. Too late. A massive pine branch broke free from a tree bent beneath ice. The limb came down like a falling spear. There was no time, no room, no escape. Then something slammed into Wade's chest. Shadow. The dog launched himself forward, hard. The impact threw Wade sideways off the trail. He crashed into deep snow. The branch struck the ground exactly where he had been standing. The sound exploded through the forest. Silence followed. For 1 second, Wade couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then he heard it. A sharp cry. Not human. Shadow. Wade scrambled upright. Panic hit instantly. The dog lay several feet away. One shoulder pinned awkwardly beneath shattered wood. Blood stained the snow, bright red against white. No. The word escaped before he realized he had spoken. Shadow tried to stand. Failed. Wade was already moving, ignoring the cold, ignoring everything. He pushed the branch aside, dropped to his knees. The wound sat high along the dog's left shoulder. A jagged piece of wood had torn through muscle. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to matter. Far too deep for comfort. Shadow whined softly. The sound hit Wade harder than any storm ever could. For years, the dog had protected him, guided him, grounded him during nightmares, pulled him back from memories that refused to stay buried. And now the dog was hurt because he had stepped into danger first. The guilt arrived fast, sharp, familiar, too familiar. Suddenly another image appeared. Helmand Province. A medic kneeling in the dust. Blood. Everywhere. A young soldier asking if he was going to be okay. Wade remembered trying to answer. Remembered not knowing how. His hands began shaking. Just slightly. The same tremor. The same helpless feeling. For a moment, the forest blurred. The past threatened to swallow the present. Then Shadow nudged his wrist. A small movement, but enough. The dog needed him now. Not then. Now. Wade inhaled sharply. Forced himself back into the moment. Training took over. He opened the medical kit, cleaned the wound, applied pressure, checked for fractures, wrapped the shoulder carefully, methodically, one step at a time, just like years ago. Only this time he wasn't trying to save a stranger. He was trying to save the best friend he had left. The procedure took nearly 40 minutes. By the end, Wade's gloves were stained red. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Shadow finally rested his head against Wade's leg. Exhausted, but alive. Wade sat beside him in the snow. One hand buried in the thick fur around the dog's neck. Neither spoke, neither moved. Above them, snow drifted quietly through the trees. For the first time since finding Raven Ridge, Wade felt something close to fear. Not for himself, for Shadow. Because he knew something the mountain didn't. He could survive this winter alone. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Hours later, they finally began the long climb back toward the bunker. Slow, painful. Shadow limped. But he walked. Every step felt like a victory. As darkness settled across the mountain, Wade glanced down at the scarlet stains left behind in the snow. The storm quickly covered them, erasing the evidence, but not the memory. And deep inside, a question kept repeating itself. What if next time Shadow couldn't get up? The journey back to Raven Ridge took nearly twice as long, not because of the storm, because Wade refused to rush the dog. Every few hundred yards he stopped, checked the bandage, checked Shadow's breathing, checked the color around the wound. The same careful routine he once used on injured soldiers. Only now, every small sign mattered more. By the time they reached the bunker, darkness had swallowed the mountain. Cole Brennan met them at the hatch. The old ranger saw the blood immediately. His face hardened. What happened? Tree branch. Cole looked at Shadow. The dog limped past them and settled beside the stove without complaint. That worried Wade more than whining would have. Shadow never complained. Not when he should. The next several days moved slowly, painfully. The storm trapped everyone beneath its grip. Snow buried entire sections of Raven Ridge. Wind carved walls of ice around the entrance. The mountain had become an island. Inside the bunker, Wade focused on one thing, helping Shadow heal, The dog slept more than usual. A lot more. Some mornings Wade woke before dawn just to check whether Shadow's chest was still rising and falling. Every time he saw the steady rhythm, relief loosened something inside him, a feeling he never admitted aloud, not even to himself. The radio became their only connection to the outside world, and the news kept getting worse. Power outages, road collapses, supply shortages, medical emergencies. One evening, an emergency broadcast crackled through the static. Main food storage facility suffered structural failure. The transmission broke apart, then returned. Significant losses, reported. Static again. Residents urged to conserve supplies. Wade exchanged a look with Cole. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. The town's main warehouse had failed. Exactly what Wade had feared. The following morning, something unexpected happened. The bunker door opened. A woman stumbled inside carrying a child wrapped in blankets. Snow covered both of them. The boy looked no older than 8. His face burned with fever. Rachel Dunn. Wade recognized her immediately. Single mother, waitress at the diner. One of the few people who had never openly mocked him. But she had never defended him either. For a moment, nobody moved. Rachel's eyes swept across the bunker, the stove, the supplies, the warmth, the shelter. Then tears filled them. Not dramatic, just exhausted, the kind that arrived after someone stopped pretending they were strong. My son can't breathe right. Her voice cracked. Nobody knows what to do anymore. The boy coughed weakly, a wet sound, deep in his chest. Wade knelt beside him. Years ago, before the military, before the nightmares, before everything changed, he'd worked wilderness rescue in Montana summers. Enough training remained, enough experience. He listened, observed, checked temperature, breathing, hydration, nothing magical, nothing impossible, just calm, methodical care, the way Frank had taught him, the way the army reinforced it. Shadow slowly approached, still limping, still healing. The German shepherd lowered himself beside the child, close enough to share warmth, close enough to comfort. The boy reached out weakly. His fingers found Shadow's fur. For the first time since entering the bunker, he smiled. A small smile. But real, Rachel noticed. So did Wade. Something eased in the room. The child remained through the night. By morning, the fever had broken slightly. Not gone, but improving. Enough. Rachel sat quietly near the stove while snow rattled against the mountain. Finally, she spoke. You were right. Wade didn't answer immediately. The words felt strange, heavy. I wasn't trying to be right. She looked down. I know. A long silence followed. Then she asked something unexpected. Why didn't you leave? Wade frowned. What do you mean? When everyone laughed. The question lingered between them. He looked toward Shadow. The dog slept beside the boy, one scarred shoulder rising and falling steadily. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the answer came easily. Because winter doesn't care whether people believe in it. Rachel nodded slowly. By afternoon, she prepared to leave. Before going, she stood near the bunker entrance, looking back, trying to memorize everything, the warmth, the safety, the proof. Wade knew what would happen next, not because Rachel intended it, because people talk, especially desperate people. See, word would spread. It always did. 3 days later, it reached the church. Sunday service had become one of the few gatherings still possible in Red Hollow. The roads were nearly gone. The grocery shelves stood half empty. Children coughed through the nights. People were frightened. Pastor Eli Bennett stood before the congregation with a Bible open in his hands, trying to offer certainty, trying to offer comfort. Then Rachel stood. The room fell silent. Everyone knew her. Everyone knew her son. My boy slept through the night. Her voice carried clearly. No drama. No speech. Just facts. He slept beside Wade Mercer's dog. Silence. The fever started breaking there. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the floor. Then, another voice spoke. An older rancher. The radio says Mercer was right about the roads. Someone else added quietly. He warned us. Another. And we ignored him. The church became still. Pastor Bennett looked down at the Bible in his hands. For several seconds he didn't speak, didn't move. Outside, wind rattled the stained glass windows. Inside, something far more important was happening. The town's certainty was breaking. Not dramatically, not all at once, like ice cracking beneath weight. Slowly, inevitably. Finally, the pastor closed the Bible. The sound echoed through the sanctuary. Nobody missed its meaning. And hundreds of feet above the valley, deep inside Raven Ridge, Wade Mercer sat beside a recovering German shepherd and stared into the stove fire. He had no idea the town was finally beginning to realize something. The storm wasn't the reason they were in trouble. The storm had only revealed it. They had stopped listening long before winter arrived. By the first week of January, Red Hollow was no longer fighting winter. It was surviving it. Barely. The snowpack along the valley roads stood taller than pickup trucks. Power lines hung broken across frozen fields. The town's backup generators had begun failing one by one. Every morning brought another problem. Another shortage. Another family in trouble. The final blow came before dawn. A deep crack echoed through the valley. People heard it from their homes, from the church, from the school gymnasium now being used as an emergency shelter. At first, many thought it was thunder. Then came the second sound, wood collapsing, metal twisting. The main food warehouse had finally given up. Weeks of wet snow had piled across the roof until the entire structure folded inward. By sunrise, half the town stood staring at the wreckage. Flour buried, canned goods crushed, fuel supplies damaged. The silence among the crowd felt heavier than the storm itself. Mayor Darren Holt arrived shortly afterward. For the first time since anyone could remember, he looked old, not tired, old. Pastor Eli Bennett stood beside him. Neither man had answers anymore. The storm had taken those. A little before noon, Noah Parker spoke the words everyone had been avoiding. Mr. Mercer warned us. Nobody corrected him. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. The truth had become impossible to ignore. That evening, a meeting was held inside the church. Not many people argued. There wasn't enough energy left for pride. The discussion lasted less than 20 minutes. Then Mayor Holt made the decision. We go to Raven Ridge. No speeches followed. No debate. Only quiet acceptance. The next morning, they began the climb. 6 men, 3 sleds, ropes, tools, emergency supplies. Mayor Holt, Pastor Bennett, Kurt Maddox, 2 ranchers, and the same county official who had helped remove Wade from the Veterans Center. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Snow reached their knees before they even left town. The climb became worse, higher up. Wind struck the slopes with brutal force. Visibility disappeared without warning. Twice the sleds overturned. Once Pastor Bennett nearly slid into a ravine hidden beneath drifting snow. Nobody spoke much. Breathing required too much effort. The mountain demanded everything. Hour after hour, they climbed. The same route Wade and Shadow had taken weeks earlier, only now the weather was far worse. Near sunset, they finally saw it. Smoke, a thin gray ribbon rising from Raven Ridge. Steady, controlled, alive, not the smoke of desperation, not the smoke of panic, the smoke of preparation. For several seconds, the men simply stared, because that smoke represented something none of them had managed to build. Security, hope, a future. Darkness had already begun settling over the mountain when they reached the steel hatch. Mayor Holt raised a gloved hand, knocked twice. No answer came immediately, only wind. Then the hatch opened. Warm air spilled outward, not hot, not luxurious, just steady warmth, the kind winter couldn't steal. Wade Mercer stood in the opening. For a moment, nobody moved. The mayor looked at him. The pastor looked at him. Kurt Maddox looked at him. The county official looked at him. And suddenly every conversation from October returned. Every laugh, every dismissal, every accusation. Yet Wade said nothing, not a single word. He simply stepped aside, an invitation, nothing more. One by one, they climbed down. The reaction was always the same, silence. The bunker looked different now, alive. The stove burned steadily. Dry firewood lined the walls. Water tanks stood full. Storage shelves held organized supplies. The repaired ventilation system moved warm air throughout the shelter. Near the eastern section, vegetables grew beneath the naturally heated stone Frank Mercer had discovered decades earlier. Small green leaves. Fresh food. In January, Kurt Maddox stopped walking. His eyes remained fixed on the plants. Good Lord. Nobody answered. Words seemed inadequate. Pastor Bennett removed his gloves slowly. The warmth had already softened the ice frozen into the fabric. His gaze moved across the bunker, the shelter, the supplies, the people already living there, then finally toward Wade. I'm sorry. The words barely rose above a whisper, yet everyone heard them. Wade studied the older man. For a moment the bunker became completely silent. Then Wade nodded once. Not dramatic, not emotional, just acceptance. The pastor's shoulders lowered slightly. Something heavy left the room, something that had been there for months, maybe years. Mayor Holt approached next. His face carried the exhaustion of a man who had spent too long pretending certainty. We should have listened. Wade looked toward the mountain map hanging beside Frank's old photograph, then toward Shadow. The German shepherd lay near the stove, his injured shoulder still healing, his scar visible beneath the fur. The dog opened one eye, then closed it again. Safe, at peace. Finally Wade spoke. Winter doesn't care who was right, the mayor swallowed, because he understood exactly what Wade meant. Outside, another wave of wind struck Raven Ridge. Inside, nobody felt the need to argue anymore. That night, as families began arriving in groups, the true purpose of the bunker finally became clear. Children slept near the warm stone wall. Parents shared food. Neighbors helped neighbors. The shelter filled exactly as Frank Mercer had intended decades earlier. And then, Cole Brennan revealed one final truth. The old ranger stood beside the original construction plans. His weathered finger traced the expanded sections of the bunker. Storage rooms, sleeping areas, water systems, additional ventilation. The capacity numbers written in Frank's handwriting. 40 people, maybe more. Cole looked directly at the mayor, then at the others. Frank didn't build this place for himself. The room fell silent again. Cole's gaze shifted toward Wade. He didn't even build it for Wade. Confusion crossed several faces. The old ranger smiled faintly. He built it for all of you. No one spoke after that, because suddenly every shelf, every wall, every repair, every hidden room, every sacrifice made sense. Wade Mercer had never been preparing to survive alone. From the very beginning, he had been preparing a place for the people who once called him a liar. And somehow that truth hit harder than the storm ever could. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Red Hollow would have survived that winter if Wade and Shadow had stayed silent? If your answer is yes, comment 1 below. If your answer is no, comment 0. And if Shadow earned your respect today, leave a in the comments so we can see how many people believe a loyal dog can change lives. Don't forget to subscribe and join our community for more powerful stories about courage, loyalty, survival, and the unbreakable bond between veterans and their dogs. Your next unforgettable story is already waiting. We'll see you in the next one.